The pickup outside the window was the color of an old penny left in the rain, and that was the first thing the girl behind the counter decided about the man who drove it. Russ Bremer stepped through the door of the morning watch at 12 minutes past 6, stamped the cold off his boots, and waited his turn. A young couple in matching parkas drifted in behind him. The cashier, name tag Tara, hair in a knot she kept touching, looked up at the couple and brightened like a porch light. She took their order around Russ as if he were the coat rack. He let it happen. He had been treated worse, in better places, by people with more reason to know him. He paid cash for a black coffee, said thank you to a girl who didn't answer, and carried it to the corner table by the radiator. He lifted the cup, and he stopped, the rim an inch from his mouth, not breathing. Not because of how they'd looked at him, because of what the two of them said next, when they thought the room was empty of anyone who mattered. 19 days later, the whole of Washington Street would crowd through that same door before the sun cleared the lake. But on that gray Thursday, there were 5 people inside, and not one of them spoke. That Thursday had started the way most of his mornings started, which was to say, early and alone and on purpose. Russ had slept in the truck off Route 41 outside Marquette, with the heater clicking and the lake throwing its long, cold breath against the windshield. He was 49 years old, and he had chosen this, the road, the seasons, the work that came in a town and ran out of it. People looked at the rust and the bedroll behind the seat and assumed a man at the end of something. They were wrong. He was a journeyman by trade and by temperament, hands that fixed compressors and walk-in coolers, and the kind of machinery small towns couldn't afford to replace, and he went where the work was, the way other men went to an office. He kept his clothes folded in squares. He woke before the alarm out of an old habit he'd never bothered to break. When he walked into a room he didn't know, his eyes found the back door before they found the menu, and he stood a half step off center, the way you learn to stand when standing in the open used to cost something. None of it was sad to him. It was just the shape his life had taken, and he had made his peace with the shape. On the bench seat beside the gear shift sat a notebook with a blue cloth cover, soft at the corners from being opened 1,000 times. His father had run the rail yard in Escanaba, checking cars off a clipboard in the dark, and the one thing he'd left Russ besides a strongback was a sentence he said most mornings of his life. Count the people first, the rest you can always recover. Russ had carried it through a war and out the other side. He wrote things in the notebook because his father had taught him that a thing written down was a thing you'd done. You couldn't pretend later you hadn't seen it. Tucked inside the front cover was a photograph, creased white along one fold. A man and a woman in front of a brick storefront, a hand-painted paint sign drying behind them, the woman laughing with her head tipped back. On the back, in pencil that had gone gray, opening day, June 2009. Come up sometime, Sarge, first cup's on me. The man in the photo was Danny Sorensen. He had been 27 the morning he died. In 2010, 15 years gone now, a guardsman called back from his own front counter to a valley on the other side of the world. Russ had been his platoon sergeant. He had carried Danny 1,100 meters, and it had not been enough, and the last full thing Danny said to him, before the medevac and the long quiet after, was take care of Margie's in the shop, Sarge, promise. And Russ had promised. He had meant to drive up the next month. The next month became a season. The season became a decade and a half. The way debts you most intend to pay are the ones you keep moving to the bottom of the pile. He had finally pointed the truck north because a man could only carry an unkept promise so far before it started to feel like one more thing he'd left in a valley. So when he had pulled onto Washington Street in downtown Marquette that morning and seen the brick storefront from the photograph, the same brick, the same wide window, his chest had done something it hadn't done in years. The painted sign was still there above the door, gone soft at the edges with weather. The morning watch, and underneath, smaller the line Danny had loved enough to put on a wall. No one drinks alone. Russ had stood on the sidewalk a moment with his hat in his hands. Then he had gone in to keep 15 years late, the one appointment he should have kept first. That was what made the next part land the way it did. He had clocked the room without meaning to. An old man 2 tables over in a wool coat too warm for indoors, nursing a small drink and a folded newspaper, the kind of regular a place forgets it has. A second man at the espresso machine, mid-30s, glossy, a manager's confidence in the set of his shoulders. Russ caught the name on his shirt later. Garrett, and the cologne before that, a sharp, expensive thing that filled the corner the radiator couldn't reach. And behind the till, 2 girls who had decided the rusted truck told them everything they needed to know. He'd let the slight pass. He was good at letting things pass. He sat in the corner and lifted his cup, and the second cashier, Kayla, a phone she didn't bother to hide, leaned toward Tara and pitched her voice low, the careless slow of people who've checked the room and counted no one in it. Garrett says she's signing in 19 days, Kayla said. Whole thing. He's got it lined up. She won't make it to spring anyway. Tara wasn't whispering. She just sort of floats around back like a ghost. It's honestly sad. Garrett basically runs it now. It's so easy, though. A small laugh. Like she doesn't even look at the paperwork. She just signs whatever he puts in front of her. That was the moment the coffee stopped an inch from Russ Bramer's mouth. She didn't have to ask who she was. He had been looking at her on the wall for 15 years. Somewhere behind the swinging kitchen door of the shop Danny had built with both hands, the woman from the photograph was floating around like a ghost in her own front room, while 2 children with phones laughed about how easy it was, and a man with good cologne lined up something to be signed in 19 days. Russ set the cup down without a sound. He had a way of going still that other still men recognized and no one else noticed at all. His face did not change. He looked at the coffee ring on the table. There was one, a faint brown circle nobody had wiped, and he turned the cup a 1/4 inch so the handle pointed the way it should. An old habit, squaring a thing that didn't need squaring. Then he saw her. The kitchen door swung, and a woman came out with a tray of cups, 51 years old, and moving like someone who'd been on her feet since 4 gray, coming in at the temple she kept tucking behind her ear. She set the cups down at the service end without a word to anyone, and Garrett said something to her with a smile that didn't reach past his teeth, and she nodded the small, tired nod of a person agreeing to a thing she stopped having the strength to question. She didn't look at the corner. She had no reason to. To Margie Sorensen, the man in the worn jacket at the table by the radiator was just one more stranger passing through a town strangers pass through. She didn't know she was looking at the last thing her husband had asked anyone to do. Russ stayed until his coffee was cold, which did not take long. He watched the way you watch when watching is the only honestest thing left to do. He saw Tara greet a man in a fleece with a wide, warm "Hey, what can I get started for you?" and saw her hand the old man in the wool coat his refill, without a word or a glance, the way you'd hand a leash back to a dog. He saw a printed sheet taped beside the register. He couldn't read it from the table, only that it had the clean, ugly look of a rule. He saw the wall where the photograph from his notebook had clearly once hung. There was a paler rectangle in the paint, a ghost of a frame, and nothing in it now. He left the cup on the table. Nobody said goodbye. He hadn't expected them to. The bell over the door chimed him out into the cold, and the lake was the color of slate all the way to where the gray came down to meet it. That night, Russ parked the truck behind the closed hardware store and ran the heater and opened the blue notebook on his knee. He did not write about Danny. He did not write about the photograph or the promise or the 15 years. He turned to a clean page, clicked the pen twice the way his father had, and wrote down only the things a man could see if he looked. The things he was not yet allowed to pretend he hadn't. Reg, price call for 5. Senior discount sign gone, paler square on the board where it was. House rules taped at till, 45-min limit, read tomorrow. Wall west side, frame removed. Recent, owner works the back, manager works the front, backwards, 19 days. He looked at the last line a long time. Outside, the wind came off superior and worked at the door seals the way it had worked at men and boats and whole towns for 10,000 years, patient and without malice, wearing down whatever held still. Count the people first, his father said, somewhere under the engine's tick. The rest you can always recover. Russ closed the notebook on the photograph, and tomorrow he would go back in through the front door. And this time he would read the sign by the register all the way to the bottom. The sign by the register read like something a lawyer had been paid to make sound friendly. Russ read it the next morning while Tara made a teenager's drink with 3 kinds of syrups and a smile, all the way to the bottom this time, the way he'd promised himself he would. Welcome to the morning watch. To keep our space comfortable for everyone, seating is limited to 45 minutes during peak hours. Else outside food and drink are not permitted. We reserve the right to refuse service. Thank you for understanding. Management. He'd seen the type before in barracks and motor pools and the back offices of men who'd discovered that a rule, properly worded, could do the work of a closed door without the noise of slamming one. To keep our space comfortable for everyone. He thought of the old man in the wool coat, the one who'd nursed a small drink and a newspaper like a man stretching $1 into an hour of being somewhere warm with other people in it. 45 minutes, he thought of the line on the wall outside. No one drinks alone. Somebody had taped one over the other and decided they didn't contradict. Russ ordered the same black coffee and sat at the same corner table, and he did the only thing he was any good at, which was watch and nothing down until he was sure of it. What he saw took shape slowly, the way a stain comes up under a flashlight. The girls were warm to some people and cold to others, and the line between them was not money, exactly, and not quite age, but something nearer to ease, to whether a person walked in looking like they expected to be welcome. The fleece and running shoes crowd got names and recommendations. A woman in a hospital lanyard, still in scrubs, got a flat, what'll it be, and her name spelled wrong on the cup and no second look. Russ watched a man come in shaking snow off a Carhartt and get the same nothing the Russ truck had earned him, and he understood that he had not been singled out. He had simply walked in on a system that had been running so long the people inside it no longer heard it. The old man in the wool coat came in at 6:40, the same as the day before, and this time Russ caught his name. Tara called it across the counter like a complaint. Earl. You want the small again? Earl said yes, the small again, and counted his change out on the counter with the deliberateness of a man whose money had gotten slower than his needs. Russ watched him carry the cup to a window table, unfold the newspaper, and settle in for the 41 minutes he'd be allowed before someone reminded him about the 45. A little girl came in around 8, holding the hand of a grandmother who ordered cocoa and a coffee and counted out the price with a small wince Russ recognized. The wince of someone who remembered when it cost less. The girl was maybe 6. She had a missing front tooth and the unblinking honesty of the very young, and on her way to the window she stopped Russ's table and considered his jacket and his hands and the truck out the window, and she said, "Is your truck broke too?" "Penny," the grandmother said. "It runs," Russ told the girl. "It's just old. Old things still work." Penny weighed this against whatever she knew about old things. "My grandma says this place used to have free cookies for kids." Penny. The grandmother steered her gently toward the window, mouthing sorry over her shoulder, and Russ filed it where he filed everything. Used to. The town was full of used to. He was beginning to understand that used to had a date on it, and the date was about 3 years back. He found that out from Earl, eventually, because Earl was lonely the specific way that men go lonely when the people they used to talk to have died or moved or stopped coming, and a stranger who'd nod was worth more than the coffee. Russ offered to share the corner table out of the rain that had started, and Earl took it, and over the next hour, in the unhurried way of old men, he told Russ about the shop the way it had been. Danny Sorensen, Earl said, had been a good kid. Built the place with his own 2 hands and his wife's good sense, ran it maybe a year before the guard called him up, and then, Earl made a small gesture, the gesture men of his generation used instead of the word. Vietnam, Earl added for himself. He didn't elaborate and Russ didn't ask. The two of them sat with it a moment. 2 men who'd been to different versions of the same place. Margie had kept the shop after, Earl said. Run it 15 years on stubbornness and good baking. Used to be the seniors got their coffee at $1 off. Used to be a man could sit all morning. Used to be Margie knew your order before you got to the counter and your kid's name and your dog's. Then this Garrett fellow turned up, 3 years now, said he'd help her with the business side, the books, the buying. And he did help, Earl said, fair about it. Place was hurting. He turned it around, I'll give him that. Margie was grateful. Whole town was, near enough. Earl looked into his small coffee. Just somewhere in there it stopped being her place and started being his, and nobody can quite say what day that happened. Russ could feel the shape of it now, the way you feel the shape of a thing in a dark room before your hand finds it. He didn't write at the table. He wrote that night. The thing that got him into the back was the compressor. He heard it the second morning, a walk-in cooler, kicking on with a knock and a long-labored grugrun, the sound of a unit running hot because nobody had cleaned the condenser coils in a year or pulled the maintenance a service contract would have caught. Russ had spent 20 years listening to machines tell him how close they were to quitting, and this one was telling him plainly. He mentioned it, low and easy, to the one employee behind the counter who'd looked at him like a person. A quiet kid named Devin who restocked and swept and got spoken to by the girls the way Earl got spoken to by the room. "It'll seize inside a month," Russ said, "probably on the coldest morning, when you can least afford to lose the milk." Devin glanced toward the kitchen door. "We're not really supposed to. I'm not asking for anything. Just tell whoever needs to know. I do this for a living. I could look at it in 10 minutes. It got to Margie the way small mercies travel in small places, sideways, through a kid who didn't want to be blamed if the milk spoiled. She came out wiping her hands on her apron and looked at Russ for the first time as something other than furniture, which is to say, with the wariness of a woman who'd learned that strangers offering help usually arrived with a bill. She was tired in a way that had set into her face like weather. Up close, he could see Danny's photograph in her. The same laugh lines, gone quiet now from disuse. "Devin says you think the cooler's going," she said. "It's telling on itself. I can hear it from out front. We have a service for that. Then the service hasn't been out in a long while." He kept his voice flat and kind, the voice he'd used on frightened privates and frightened lieutenants, the one that took the fear out of a fact by refusing to dress it up. "I'll look for free. If I'm wrong, you've lost 10 minutes. She studied him. Russ had the sense she was a good judge of people who'd simply stopped trusting her own judgment, and he held still and let her look. "All right," she said finally. "But quick. Garrett doesn't like." She stopped herself, and the stopping told him more than the sentence would have. The back of the morning watch told Russ everything the front had been built to hide. He clocked it the way he'd once clocked a supply yard, which is to say in a single sweep that took inventory of the gap between what was written and what was real. The coils were furred gray with dust. He blew them out and tightened a belt, and the unit settled into the steady hum it should have had all along, and that took him 4 minutes. The other 6 he spent seeing, a clipboard by the back door with a delivery log, cases of beans signed for that he could count, and shelf space that didn't add up to what had been signed for. A petty cash box with a lid that didn't lock and not much under it. And bills, a small drift of them, opened and refolded that someone had been keeping back here instead of in an office, the way you keep a thing where the owner won't wander past it. He didn't touch the bills. He'd learned the difference between seeing and meddling a long time ago. He squared the clipboard so it sat flush on its nail, washed his hands, and went back out front. And Margie said thank you in the surprised way of someone unused to being helped without a catch, and Russ said the cooler would last her the winter now, and didn't mention the rest. He didn't have to mention it to himself. He wrote it in the truck that night, every line of it. Coils a year filthy, no service in 12+ mo. Compressor neglected, not broken, saving on maintenance. Beans signed to beans on shelf, off, where's it going? Bills kept him back, not office, on purpose. Owner has to ask permission to fix her own cooler. Garrett Voss did not see himself as a thief, and that was the part Russ would come to understand last and like least. Garrett saw himself as a man owed. That afternoon, after the lunch rush thinned, he stepped out the back to take a call where the espresso machine couldn't drown it. And he didn't know the kitchen window was cracked an inch against the heat. And he didn't know the man fixing nothing in particular by the back door had ears trained to pull a voice out of noise. Garrett was talking to someone he called Hollis. "The walkthrough's still on for the 19th, Garrett said. "Yeah, lease and all." "No, she's fine. She'll sign. She's been signing." A pause and then a laugh that had no warmth in it. "Don't worry about the old lady. I've been carrying this place 3 years. I earned it." He had, in his own ledger, earned it. Russ would learn the rest in pieces over the next several days, but the spine of it was there in the backstep call. Garrett Voss had owned his own restaurant once, 2 towns over, and watched it close in the slow public humiliation that only a small town can administer, and he had come to the morning watch a man with a wound where his pride used to be. He had worked. He had been good at the parts of business that Margie, gutted by grief, couldn't face: the books, the suppliers, the cold arithmetic of keeping a door open. The town had thanked him. Margie had leaned on him, and somewhere in 3 years of being thanked for keeping a dead man's dream alive, the gratitude had curdled into a bill he intended to collect. The shop wasn't hers to him anymore. It was the thing he'd saved, and a thing you save, a certain kind of man decides, becomes yours. He came back and rubbing his hands against the cold, and he saw Russ by the back door, and he stopped. "Help you with something?" The smile was on, but the eyes were doing math. "Cooler was running hot," Russ said. "Fixed it. We have a service for that." "So I heard." Russ wiped his hands on a rag and met the man's eyes without anything in his own. No challenge, no deference, just the flat patience of a man who had outlasted harder rooms. "Coils were a year dirty. Whoever's billing you for service hasn't been out. You might want to look at that invoice." For a half-second, something moved behind Garrett's face, and it was not guilt. It was the alertness of an animal that has caught an unfamiliar scent in its own den. Who is this? What does he see? Then the smile came back down over it like a shade. "I'll look into it. We don't really need walk-ins back here, though." He held the door to the front and waited, polite as a closing trap, until Russ went through it. Russ went. He had learned long ago that you don't win the room you're standing in. You win the one you're patient enough to come back to. But on his way past the storeroom, Garrett ushering him out, talking now about the weather, the smooth, easy talk of a man papering over a moment. Russ's eye caught on a card box shoved in the gap between the shelving and the wall, the kind of box that holds the things a place has decided it's done with. A corner of a picture frame stuck up out of it. Glass, and behind the glass, a man and a woman in front of a brick storefront, the woman laughing with her head tipped back. It was the photograph from the wall. The one whose ghost still hung in the paint out front. Somebody had taken Danny down and put him in a box behind the storeroom with a stack of old menus and a roll of expired coupons, and on top of the box, folded once, sat an envelope with a window in it and a line of red along the edge that Russ had seen on enough bad mornings to read from 6 feet away. Final Norder. Garrett's hand came up to the storeroom door and pulled it shut. Easy, casual, the way you close a door on a draft. "Mind the step," he said. Russ minded the step. He carried the rest of it out into the cold and didn't open the notebook until the truck door was shut and the heater going and Washington Street empty in his mirrors. Then he wrote, and his handwriting was very even, the way a man's gets when he's making certain the steadiness goes onto the page and not into his hands. "Danny is in a box behind the storeroom, final Nora on top of him. Red bars, lease or taxes. Garrett to Hollis, walk through the 19th. She'll sign, she's been signing. I've been carrying this place 3 years, I earned it." He sat with the engine ticking and the lake breathing against the glass, and under it, quiet, his father counting. He had come north to keep one promise, a small late thing, a cup of coffee and a hand on a widow's shoulder. He understood now it was going to cost more than that. And he understood something else, sitting in the dark with Danny's face folded into the notebook against his chest. He had 11 days, give or take, to figure out exactly what he was looking at, because on the 19th, a man with good cologne intended to walk a stranger named Hollis through a dead man's dream and have the widow sign it away with a pen she didn't know was loaded. The numbers came to Russ the way the truth always came to him. Not in a flash, but in a slow accumulation, a column of small certainties that didn't mean much alone and meant everything stacked. He came back every morning for the next 4 days, and he made himself useful in the small, invisible ways a man makes himself useful when he wants the run of a place. He rehung a sagging shelf bracket in the storeroom. He rewired a flickering ballast in the back hallway that had been browning out for months. He fixed the latch on the alley door that hadn't caught true since before Garrett's time, and each repair bought him another 20 minutes in the back with his eyes open. And each 20 minutes added a line to the blue notebook. He was a supply sergeant by training, which is a thing people misunderstand. They think it means counting boxes. It means knowing, the way you know your own pulse, the difference between what a system claims and what a system contains. And knowing that the gap between the two is never an accident. He had run a forward supply point where a misplaced pallet could mean a convoy went out short, and he had developed there a thing that never left him. He could look at what came in and what was on the shelf and feel the leak before he could prove it. The morning watch was leaking everywhere. The delivery log said the shop took 12 pounds of beans a week. The shelf and the hopper and the honest math of a place this size said it used maybe 8. 4 pounds a week, signed for, paid for, gone somewhere that wasn't a customer's cup. The petty cash box logged register pulls that didn't match the days the register was busy. And the prices. Russ walked the chalk menu by the door, 3 mornings running, and watched the small numbers creep. A dime here, a quarter there. The senior discount not just gone from the sign, but gone from the math, so that Earl's small coffee cost 40 cents more than it had a season ago, and Earl, who counted his change on the counter, had no way to know it had ever cost less. It was not, Russ understood, the work of a man stealing for the thrill of it. It was the work of a man bleating a place steadily while telling himself he was being paid back. That was worse, a thief you could catch in the act. A man who believed he was owed would explain himself all the way to the door. He needed the spine of it, though, and the spine was paper, and the paper was in the office Garrett kept to himself. It was Margie, in the end, who let him near it, and she did it without knowing what she was doing. Russ had been there at 5:15 one morning. He'd offered to be there for the cooler, said he wanted to watch it through a cold start, and she'd unlocked the alley door for him in the dark with the wary gratitude that was the only kind she had left. And before the girls came in, before Garrett's cologne arrived, there was an hour when the shop belonged to Margie the way it must have belonged to her once all time. She baked. He hadn't known. The front of the house sold came off a truck in a box. But in that gray hour before opening, Margie Sorensen made cardamom bread the old Finnish way her mother-in-law had taught her, pulla, 3 strands braided and brushed and baked, until the whole back of the shop smelled like a thing worth getting up for. She moved the way Russ moved when he worked. No wasted motion, every step earned, and for the length of one braid she didn't look tired at all. Danny's mother's recipe, she said when she caught him watching. He grew up on it. First year we were open, it was the only thing that sold. A small private smile there and gone. Garrett took it off the menu, said it didn't fit the brand, too slow to make, too cheap to charge for. She brushed the egg wash on in long, even strokes. I make it anyway. I don't put it out front. I make it. She set the tray in the oven and closed the door on it gently, the way you close a door on something sleeping. Some things you keep making, whether or not anybody's buying. Russ thought of the photograph in the box and didn't say so. He said town would buy it, the old ones anyway, the ones who remember. The old ones, Margie said. And there was something in the way she said it, an ache she'd stopped letting herself feel, or exactly who Garrett's been telling me to stop catering to. That was when she went to the office to find a receipt she wanted him to see. Proof, she thought, that the service company really had been out, because she wanted to believe it. And she left the door open, and she stood beside him pulling a folder, and Russ Bremer saw, in the 8 seconds before she closed it, more than he'd seen in 8 days. He saw a lease assignment. He didn't read it all. He read what a man reads in a glance, which was the headline and the signature line. A statement of commercial lease and a date, the 19th, and at the bottom on the tenant's line, a signature. Margaret Sorensen. The hand was wrong. Russ had watched Margie sign a delivery slip 2 days before. He'd watched her sign it the way she did everything, deliberate, the M large and the rest of it, trailing small and tired, the G in Margie looping back under the line. The name on the lease assignment was upright and careful and confident, the signature of someone who had practiced being Margaret Sorensen rather than someone who simply was. And it was dated the 2nd of the month. And Russ knew, because Earl had mentioned it, the way Earl mentioned everything, that on the 2nd of the month, Margie had been 3 hours south in Green Bay at her sister's, because her sister had had a hip done, and Margie had closed the shop a rare day to go. She hadn't signed it. She hadn't been in the building. "Here," Margie said, holding out the service receipt, and Russ took it and looked at it and didn't see it at all and said, "That's the one." They were out in spring. She looked relieved, and he hated giving her the relief. And he gave it to her anyway, because the alternative was telling her, here, now, in the warm bread smelling dark, that someone had forged her name onto the deed of the thing she had left of Danny, and he was not going to hand her that with no proof in his hand, and no plan and no one beside her. He needed a second pair of eyes, the kind that carried weight. He found them at the VFW post on 3rd. He'd gone there his first week without meaning anything by it, a habit, the way some men find the church in a new town and some find the bar. Russ found the post, because the post was where the men who'd count the people the way he counted them tended to wash up. He'd nursed a coffee and said little, and listened, and he'd heard Danny's name come up twice without his prompting, which told him Danny was still remembered, and Margie with him. And he'd met Gus Pelkey. Gus was 73, a Navy supply officer in his day and a CCPA for 30 years after, and he had the particular gift of a man who'd spent his life finding the lie inside a balance sheet. He didn't get angry at numbers, he just kept looking until they confessed. Russ laid it out for him over 2 bad coffees in the post's back room. The beans, the prices, the cash that didn't reconcile, the bills kept in the back. The final notice, the 19th. He did not yet mention the signature. He wanted to see what Gus made of the rest first. Gus listened the way good men listen, without interrupting, turning a pen end over end on the table. When Russ finished, Gus was quiet a while. "You've got a skim," Gus said finally, "a long one. Spread thin so no single month screams. That's not a panic, that's a discipline." He frowned at his own coffee. "How long's the manager been there?" 3 years. Then he's good for 40 grand. Easy, maybe more if the cash pulls are what you say. 43, I'd guess, by the time you run it out properly. Gus set the pen down. "But Russell, a skim's a thing you sue over slow. It's not a thing that explains a final notice and a lease changing hands on a date certain. Those don't go together. A man stealing 40 grand has a reason to keep the place open. A man buying the lease has a reason to let it close." He looked at Russ. "Unless they're the same man, and the skim's how he made sure the place got so weak she'd have to let him take it. You don't drown a thing you're stealing from, unless drowning it is the last step." Russ told him about the signature then. Gus went very still, the still of an old man who has just understood that a thing he was prepared to call greed is actually something with a harder name. "If that signature's forged," he said slowly, "you're not looking at a civil dispute over money. You're looking at fraud on a deed. That's a different room, son. That's the kind of room a man doesn't walk out of with his cologne intact." He pushed his coffee away. "Get me the lease assignment. The real signature next to it. I'll have a friend who does question documents take a look. Quietly, and get me the books, whatever you can. I'll run it to the penny." He stood and offered his hand, and his grip was a young man's. "Danny was a good kid. I sold him his first commercial insurance policy. Margie deserves better than what you're describing. Russ had what he needed, or nearly. What he didn't have was the one thing that mattered most, and he found that out the hard way the next morning when he made the mistake of trying to give Margie the truth before she was ready to be handed it. He'd meant to do it gently. He'd waited for the bread hour, the safe gray hour, and he'd said it plainly and kindly as he knew how. That he thought something was wrong with the books. That he thought Garrett was taking money. That he thought there was a paper in that office, with her name on it, that she hadn't signed, and that she should let an accountant look before the 19th. He watched her face close, like the alley door catching true. "Get out," Margie said, not loud, worse than loud. "You come in here. You fix my cooler. You watch me. All week you've been watching me, and now you tell me the one person who didn't walk away is robbing me?" Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them flat on the steel counter to stop them. "You don't know him. You don't know what it was like. After Danny, there was nobody. The town came to the funeral, and then the town went home, and I was alone in here at 4 in the morning with the books I couldn't read and the bills I couldn't pay, and I was going to lose it. I was going to lose the last thing he ever." And Garrett stayed. Garrett came in here, and he stayed, and he fixed it, and he asked for nothing for 3 years. Her voice broke, and she didn't let it. "And you've been here 9 days. Russ stood in the bread smell and took it, every word, the way he'd taken worse from frightened people who were wrong. He did not argue. Arguing was what a man did when he needed to win the room he was standing in, and he had learned not to need that. He set the truth down where she could find it later if she wanted it, and he stepped back from it. "You're right," he said. "I've been here 9 days, and I'm not asking you to believe me." He pulled a folded page from the blue notebook, not the promise, not yet. Just the column, the beans and the prices and the cash, in his even hand. "I'm asking you to let a man named Gus Pelkey look at your books before the 19th. He knew Danny. If he tells you I'm wrong, I'll get in the truck and you'll never see me again." He laid it on the counter between them. "And if he tells you I'm right, then it cost you nothing to find out. Count the people first, Margie. That's all. Count who's standing where and ask yourself why." She didn't take the page, but she didn't tear it up either. She looked at it on the steel, and at him and at the oven where Danny's mother's bread was going gold behind the glass, and Russ saw the thing he needed cross her face for 1/2 second before she shut it away. Not belief, but the memory of how to ask a question. He left her with it. On his way out, he passed the till, and Tara was there, early for once, on the phone, and she said into it, low, "I know, Uncle Garrett, I'll lock up. Yeah, the 19th, I remember." And she glanced up and saw Russ hearing it, and her face did a small, fast thing, and Russ kept walking and didn't change his stride at all. Uncle Garrett. He wrote it in the truck. He wrote all of it, the bread and the lease and the wrong signature and Gus and the 19th, and then, at the bottom, 2 lines underlined once each. Tara Garrett's niece. The whole front is family. That's how nobody saw. 11 days. The lake had gone the flat dead gray it goes before the first real snow. Russ sat with the engine ticking and the heater pushing back the cold, and the notebook open on his knee. And he understood that he had the truth now, most of it in his own hand and soon in Gus's. And that the truth, sitting in a notebook in a cold truck, would save no one at all. He had 11 days to put it in front of the only person who could act on it, in a way she couldn't turn away from, before a man with good cologne. A stranger named Hollis through Danny's front room and had Margie sign away with one practiced forgery the last appointment a dying man had ever asked anyone to keep. He came to her with it 3 mornings later, in the bread hour, because some things you can only hand a person in the dark before the rest of the world is awake to watch them receive it. Gus had run the numbers by then. He'd done it the way he did everything, slowly and completely, and he had called Russ to the back room of the post and laid it out on the table like a man laying out a hand he was sorry to be holding. $43,000, give or take a few hundred. Across 16 months, that was as far back as the records Russ could photograph would let him reach, and Gus believed it ran further. Cash pulls that didn't track the register, beans invoiced and never shelved, sold somewhere off the books or simply written off as waste and pocketed against the difference. A service contract billed quarterly to a company that, when Gus's friend made one quiet call, had no record of the account at all. He invented a vendor and paid himself through it, Gus had said, almost admiring in the way an old craftsman admires bad work done well. That's not a man who lost his temper with the books. That's a man who built a machine. And the signature. Gus's friend, the one who did question documents for insurance companies and the occasional county prosecutor, had looked at the lease assignment beside three of Margie's genuine signatures and used a word Gus repeated carefully so Russ would understand it carried weight in a courtroom. Simulated. Not Margie's hand attempting to be careful. Someone else's hand attempting to be Margie's. The pen pressure was wrong, the man said. The way a forger's always is, too even, because he wasn't writing his own name, he was drawing someone else's. So Russ had it all, on paper, certified, and he still understood that paper would not be enough. Margie had turned away from his column of numbers once already. She would not be argued into her own life. She would have to be reminded whose life it was. He brought the notebook to the bread hour, and he didn't open it to the numbers. I told you I'd been here 9 days, he said. The braids lay on the counter between them, 3 strands not yet folded. That was true, but it wasn't the start of it. He set the blue notebook down and turned it to the front, to the photograph creased white along its fold, and pushed it across the steel until it sat under the work light where she had to look at it. I've been here, one way or another, 15 years. Margie looked at the picture of herself, laughing in front of her own front door with her husband's arm around her, and her hands went still on the dough. His name was Danny Sorensen, Russ said, quiet, the words coming out in the flat, careful order of a man who'd never said them aloud and had to lay each one down to be sure of the next. I was his platoon sergeant. He showed me that photo more times than I could count. Opening day, June of '09. He kept it in his helmet. He used to say when his time was up, he was coming home to grind coffee and never wear boots again. Russ's jaw worked once. He didn't come home, Margie. I carried him, 1,100 meters. It wasn't enough, and the last whole thing he ever said to me. He stopped. He had buried this for 15 years specifically, so he would never have to do what he was doing now. He said, "Take care of Margie and the shops, Sarge." Promise. He turned a page, not to the numbers, to a single line in a younger man's handwriting dated the day Danny died. The only thing Russ had been able to write that day and the reason he'd carried a blue notebook ever since. Promise D. I'll go up. I'll see to it. I told myself next month, Russ said. 15 years of next months. I'm not a good man for waiting this long. I know that. I came up here to keep a small promise late. A cup of coffee, a hand on your shoulder, tell you he was loved. His voice didn't rise. It went lower, which on Russ was the same as another man's breaking. And I walked in and heard 2 kids laughing about how easy you were, huh, Rob? And a man lining up to take the last thing my soldier ever asked me to look after. So no, I won't get in the truck. Gus Pelkey's run your books and he'll tell you to your face what I found. But I needed you to know I'm not a stranger who showed up 9 days ago. I'm 15 years late for an appointment your husband made for me, and I am not going to miss it twice. Margie Sorensen did not cry, and Russ understood why, because he was the same. Some griefs you've held so long that letting them move feels more dangerous than keeping them still. She put one flowered hand flat on the photograph, over the brick, over the door, over the 2 of them laughing. She stayed like that a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had gone somewhere very level and very far down. He used to braid this bread on Sundays, she said, and tell me the whole town would come up here someday. She looked at the strands lying loose on the steel. Show me what you found. She didn't fall apart. She hardened, which is what strong people do when they finally let themselves believe a thing they've been refusing. They don't soften toward you. They turn, all at once, like a tide, deciding. By the time Gus came to the back of the shop that afternoon with his folder, Margie had already gone through her own drawers and found 3 more things that didn't add up, and she set them on this table beside Gus's numbers with hands that had stopped shaking entirely, and Russ watched her become, in the space of an afternoon, the woman in the photograph again. Not the laugh. That would come later if it came, but the spine under it. What they built over the next days, they built carefully, because they were not going to win this in a courtroom in 18 months. They were going to win it in the front room of the Morning Watch, in the open, on the 19th, in front of the only jury Garrett Voss had ever actually feared, which was a small town's opinion of a man who'd presented himself as its hero. Gus would have the certified numbers and the document examiner's letter. Earl would put the word out the way only a lonely man with nothing to do all day can, quietly, person to person, to the seniors who'd been priced out and the regulars who'd been timed out, until half of Washington Street knew to be at the shop the morning of the 19th without knowing exactly why. And the men from the post, 6 of them, then 10, Old Navy and Old Army and 2, who'd been where Russ and Danny had been, said they'd come and sit in no particular formation, just there, just present. The way men stand beside a thing to say this is not unwitnessed. Garrett felt it before he understood it. That was the thing about the den animal alertness in him. It worked even when his pride told it to be quiet. The cooler that fixed itself. The drifter who knew what a clean condenser coil looked like. The way Margie had stopped flinching when he spoke to her, the way she'd started this last week, looking at the menu prices with a focus she hadn't had in 3 years. He couldn't name it, but he could feel the floor of the thing he'd built going soft, and a certain kind of man, when he feels that, doesn't slow down. He speeds up. He moved the signing in his own mind to quiet and fast. Not the date. The date was the date. Hollis had a closing lined up and money behind it, and a date moved was a deal spook. But the manner. He told himself he'd get Margie alone the evening before, present it the way he always had. The assignment buried in a folder of routine things to initial, just admin. The landlord wants it updated. Sign here and here. Except this time there'd be no forging at all, because she'd sign it herself, the way she always did, without reading on his word, the way the whole machine had run for 3 years. He didn't know she'd seen her own forged name. He didn't know the hand was already being undone. And he made the small bad decision that frightened men make, the one that tells everyone watching exactly where the rot is. He came to the front on the 17th and found Russ at the corner table, and he leaned down, close, the cologne arriving first, and he kept his voice pleasant for the room, and his eyes flat for Russ. "You've fixed enough around here," Garrett said. "We're all set. I'd appreciate it if you didn't come back." And then, louder for Tara, with a smile. "Tara, this gentleman's been told. If he comes in again, he's not to be served." Tara, who was Garrett's niece, who'd laughed 11 days ago about how easy the old lady was, looked at Russ with something that wasn't quite the contempt of the first morning. Something with a flicker of unease in it now, because she'd grown up enough around her uncle to know the difference between his confidence and his fear, and this was the second one. "Sure," she said. "Whatever you say." Russ stood. He didn't argue and he didn't hurry. He set $2 on the table for a coffee he'd already paid for, a habit, squaring a thing that didn't need squaring, and he looked at Garrett Voss for a moment with no heat in it at all, the flat patience of a man who had been told to leave rooms by people with far better reason than this. "Suit yourself," Russ said. And to Margie, who'd come to the kitchen door and gone very still, a small nod, nothing more. They'd agreed on nothing more. Maybe you already know what it's like to sit in a room and watch someone be quietly told they don't belong there. To see it happen and weigh, in the half-second before you'd have to act, the cost of saying something. If you do, then you know the silence afterward isn't peace. It's a debt, and it always comes due. Russ walked out into the cold, and the bell chimed, and the room held its breath, the way that room had been holding its breath for 3 years, and somewhere under the espresso hiss, Earl folded his newspaper very slowly, and looked at the door, and said nothing, and decided something. In the truck, Russ opened the blue notebook and didn't write a number. He wrote the date, the 19th, 2 days out, and under it, the only line that mattered now. "He's frightened." Frightened men move fast and leave the door open behind them. Let him. He looked at the photograph a moment, Danny laughing in front of the door he'd built. The door a stranger named Hollis, meant to walk through in 2 mornings on the strength of a name no one had a right to sign. Russ closed the cover gently. The snow that had been threatening all week began to come down over Washington Street. The first real fall of the year, fat and slow and without any soundness at all. settling on the rust-colored hood and the dark glass and the soft-edged sign that read "No one drinks alone." And somewhere behind it, Margie Sorensen was folding 3 strands of her husband's mother's bread into a braid for a town that was about to remember, all at once and in the open, exactly who that shop had always belonged to. The 19th came in white and still, and by 6:45 there were more people inside the morning watch than its 45-minute rule had ever meant to allow. They came the way Earl had asked them to, without quite knowing why, which is the only way a small town ever does anything early in the morning. The grandmother and the gap-toothed girl, Penny, in a coat too big for her, 2 women in hospital lanyards who'd been called Pat and worse and stopped coming, a handful of the old ones who'd been priced out of their dollar coffees, sitting now at the window tables in their good caps. And along the back wall, in no particular order and no particular formation, 10 men from the post, Gus Pelkey among them with a leather folder on his knee, and beside him an old Navy chief and 2 younger men with the particular stillness Russ knew from the inside. Nobody had told them to stand. They sat, but the room had the weight of men standing. Russ was at the corner table where he'd frozen mid-sip 10 days before. He'd been told not to come back. He'd come back. He sat with his coffee and his blue notebook closed under his hand, and he did not run the room. This was not his to run. He had spent 11 days making sure of that. Garrett Voss arrived at 7 with a man Russ took for Hollis. Soft camel coat, a leather portfolio, the bored confidence of someone who bought things from people who had to sell them. Garrett stopped just inside the door at the size of the crowd, and the den animal in him went up on its feet, but his pride sat it back down. He read the room as good business. "Morning, everybody," he said, warm, expansive, a man pleased to have witnesses to his generosity. Big crowd. "Margie, we'll just step in back and take care of that paperwork. Then I'll buy the whole room around. How's that?" The kitchen door swung open. Margie Sorensen came out from the back where she had floated like a ghost for 3 years, and she did not float. She came to the front of her own shop and stood behind her own counter, gray at the temple, apron dusted with flour, and she set a plate down on the bar where every person could see it. A braid of cardamom bread, gold and glossy, the thing Garrett had taken off the menu for not fitting the brand. The smell of it reached the back wall. Earl closed his eyes for a second. "We can do the paperwork right here, Garrett," Margie said. Her voice was level and it carried. "In front of everybody, since it's about everybody." Garrett's smile held, but his eyes did the math, fast and frightened. "Margie, this is just lease admin. It's dull. There's no reason to." "Then it won't take long." She laid a single sheet on the bar beside the bread. "The lease assignment. This is the paper you want me to sign. It moves Danny's lease to a Mr. Hollis on your say-so." She turned it so the room could see the tenant's line. "Funny thing, it's already signed, Margaret Sorensen. Dated the 2nd of this month. She let that sit one beat. I was in Green Bay on the 2nd. My sister had her hip done. I closed the shop. There's 20 people here who know it, and a credit card receipt from a hospital cafeteria that says it too." She did not raise her voice. She got quieter, which was worse. "I never signed this, Garrett, so somebody drew my name." The portfolio man, Hollis, took one step back from Garrett without seeming to decide to. It was the smallest thing, a man putting daylight between himself and a problem, and the room saw it. Gus Pelkey stood, because some thinkins carry more weight standing. He opened the leather folder with the unhurried hands of a man who had spent 50 years being right about numbers. "My name's Gus Pelkey. Some of you know me. I was a Navy supply officer and a CPA in this county for 30 years, and I sold Danny Sorensen his first business policy in 2009. He didn't look at Garrett. He looked at the room, because the room was the jury. I've gone through this shop's records 16 months back, which is as far as they go. Over that time, $43,000 left this business that can't be accounted for by anything that happened across that counter. Cash that doesn't match the register. Coffee billed and never shelved. And a quarterly service contract paid to a company that," he turned a page, mild as weather, "does not exist." I called. "There's no such account. The money went to whoever set it up." Now he looked at Garrett once, the way you'd glance at an answer you already knew. And a document examiner who works for the county has looked at that signature beside 3 of Margie's real ones and put it in writing. The word she used was simulated. That's not a strong opinion. That's a finding. The room had gone very quiet, not the comfortable kind. Garrett did what frightened men do, which is talk. Okay, hold on. I saved this place. His voice came up and found an edge it hadn't planned on. Where was any of you 3 years ago? She couldn't read a balance sheet. I came in here and I worked. I carried it. I kept the lights on while she hid in the back. I earned. He caught the word before the rest of it, but the room had it now, earned, and you could feel them turn it over. There's an explanation for all of it. The vendor thing's a clerical, Uncle Garrett. It was Tara from behind the till, and she said it small and it landed like a dropped tray. Every head moved. The girl who'd laughed about how easy the old lady was stood with her hand on the register she'd guarded, and her face had finally caught up to what her uncle's confidence had been hiding from her, and she didn't have anything to add. She just said it again, quieter. Uncle Garrett, and in 2 words the last wall came down, because now the whole room understood that the warm girl at the counter and the man who ran the books were the same family running the same shop into the same ground, and that there had never been anyone above Garrett for Margie to tell. Hollis closed his portfolio. I think, he said, to no one to the door. I'm in the wrong meeting. He left, and the bell chimed him out, and nobody watched him go because nobody in that room had ever cared who he was. Garrett looked around for the faces that had high-fived him, joked with him, called him the man who saved the place. Earl was looking at him. The grandmother was looking at him. The 10 men along the back wall were looking at him with the flat, unbothered attention of men who had seen worse, and were not impressed. Not one of them looked away, and a small town's regard, once it turns all the way. He could have stayed and fought it. He chose the door. He'd come in expecting to buy a round for witnesses to his triumph, and he left through them instead, the camel-coated buyer already gone ahead of him into the snow, and his cologne hung in the warm air over the bread for a moment after the bell stopped, and then that was gone too. Margie did not chase him. Russ did not rise. There was no need. Gus's folder would go where folders like that go, as a forged name on a deed is a county takes its own slow interest in, and everyone in the room understood without being told that the man who'd walked out had walked out of more than a coffee shop. But the punishment, such as it was, happened the way real ones mostly do, quietly, in the turning of a room, in a door that chimed, and a smell that faded, and a name that would mean something different on Washington Street by noon. Russ stood then, finally, but not toward Garrett's empty doorway. He crossed to the west wall, to the paler rectangle in the paint where a frame had hung, and he took from under his arm the thing he'd carried in that morning. The photograph from his notebook, opening day, June 2009, the woman laughing with her head tipped back, set now into a plain new frame Gus's wife had found at the hardware store. He hung it on the old nail. It fit the ghost in the paint exactly, because of course it did. It had hung there for years before a frightened man decided a dead one took up too much wall. The room let out a breath it had been holding for 3 years. Penny was the one who broke the quiet, because the very young always are. She'd worked her way up to the bar and was looking at the gold braid of bread. And she said, to Margie, with the unblinking honesty of 6, "Is that the Freaky place again now?" Margie laughed. It came out of her sideways and surprised her, and it was Russ saw, the laugh from the photograph, 15 years late, and a little rusted and entirely real. "Yeah, honey," she said, and her voice caught and held. "Yeah, it's that place again." What came after took weeks, and it took the boring kind of work that no one makes a film about, and Russ did most of it at Margie's elbow because it turned out the thing the Army had spent 20 years teaching him. How to make a system tell the truth about itself was the exact thing a small shop needed to never be quietly bled again. He sat with her and Gus and built books anyone could read. Every dollar in, every dollar out, the senior discount back on the chalkboard in Margie's own hand. The prices walked back down a quarter and a dime at a time. He didn't take a wage for it. When she pressed, he said the only true thing, which was that he'd already been paid 15 years ago, 1,100 meters short of enough, and that this was just him finishing the carry. They made one new thing. In the corner by the window, the table where Earl had been timed out, and where the index of Garrett's contempt had once said an old man didn't belong, Margie put up a small hand-lettered card. Danny's table. The rule was simple, and she wrote it the way Danny would have. Any veteran, and anyone sitting alone, the first cup's on the house, and you can stay as long as the lights are on. She'd asked Russ what to call the program, and he'd said it didn't need a program, it needed a table, because the thing about getting old, or coming home, or losing the person who used to know your order was that the danger wasn't hunger. It was the long quiet of being unexpected anywhere, and a man would drive past 3 warm rooms to sit in the one that was glad he came. So they made a table that was glad. Earl took it as his own within a week. He brought a friend the second week, and the friend brought one. And by the time the lake started to break up in the spring, there were mornings, the whole place ran long and loud, and nobody timed anybody at all. Russ stayed in town that winter, fixed what the cold broke, and most mornings he sat at Danny's table with the first cup Margie wouldn't let him pay for, the blue notebook open to no particular page. He didn't take a job at the shop. He didn't need the wall to know what he'd done. He was a regular now, which was its own kind of promise kept to be, finally and reliably, somewhere expected. On the last morning before he took a job up in Houghton and pointed the truck north again, Margie came out from the back at the bread hour and set a braid in front of him, and beside it a notebook, blue cloth, soft-cornered, brand new. "For the books," she said, "since you taught me to keep them honest, and," she nodded at the wall, at Danny laughing in front of his door, "since the other one's full of him." Russ ran his thumb across the new cover, the way you touch a thing you didn't know you were waiting for. Out the wide window, the snow had stopped, and the sun was finally clearing the lake, throwing flat gold light up Washington Street, and there were people on the sidewalk. More than the room could hold at once. The line going out the door the way it had 19 mornings ago in the promise he'd made the town without meaning to. He thought of his father in the rail yard in the dark, counting cars off a clipboard. "Count the people first," the old man said, somewhere under the hum of the espresso machine. "The rest you can always recover." Russ opened the new notebook to the first clean page, and he didn't write a number, and he didn't write a name. He wrote down the one thing he'd finally done, 15 years late, so he couldn't ever pretend later he hadn't, kept it. Then he closed the cover, and he ate the bread, all of it this time, and he finished his coffee at a table that was glad he'd come. There's a particular loneliness that doesn't look like anything from the outside. A man at a window, an old name in a box, a widow baking for no one at 4 in the morning. It hides in plain rooms. Maybe the bravest thing any of us does is notice it and pull up a chair and stay.